Well, thank you, Gail, for that very kind introduction, and thank all of you for coming this morning for a little bit of a talk and then some discussion. It's clear that I am in nirvana, and I can understand why folks here want to enhance and improve it. So in a sense, I feel like I'm talking to the converted. Many times around the country, I am talking to communities that are in total crisis. But I also appreciate that the landscape here is more complicated. You just had a study done that indicates that 1 out of 5 children here are living in poverty. So the landscape does need to be improved. And I think some of the things that we're going to talk about this morning offer ways of improving the economy here. I've titled the talk partially my book, Small Mart Revolution, partially How to Build a Local Living Economy for Northern Colorado. And the starting place for me in this analysis is that the world right now seems to be in the midst of a huge debate over the direction of capitalism. And I give these two archetypes of capitalism women's names, Tina and Lois. Tina comes from Maggie Thatcher's invocation, "There is no alternative to the global economy," T-I-N-A. And I think it's fair to say that for the past generation, economic developers and the city councils that have followed them have largely embraced Tina through 3 mantras, if you will. One mantra is to try to get Toyota to locate in your backyard or any non-local business you can find. The second is to export goods as far and wide as possible, which is usually done by non-local businesses. And the third is to convince the local businesses that are largely excluded from the first 2 mantras that all of this is really in their interest. The alternative is LOIS. LOIS stands for Locally Owned and Import Substituting Development. Local ownership, I define as 51% ownership and control within a defined community. Import substitution is just a fancy economist way of saying if you can produce the goods and services in your own community, you should do it. Why? We'll see in a moment. The woman who is looking at you from the slide is not a Lois, that is the late Jane Jacobs, great urban economist, and in some ways the intellectual godmother of many of the ideas I want to share with you this morning. Out of this movement around Lois has come hundreds of communities committed to the concept of local living economies. I work closely, as Gail introduced you to, with a group called BALI, the Business Alliance for Local Living Economies, but there are other groups that are similar out there, like AMIBA, the American Independence Business Alliance. And these groups of businesses, which I'd say at this point represent literally tens of thousands of businesses, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people that are linked to those businesses, and a movement that has received, I think, national recognition. If you remember 6 months ago, Time magazine had on its cover, "Forget Organic, Eat Local." Now, it was a terrible article inside, but that we made it to the cover of Time, I think, shows that this movement has made great headway. And what unifies the folks in this movement is the belief that locally owned businesses contribute more, significantly more, to economic well-being than their counterparts. The goal, moreover, should be to maximize the way that local businesses sell to the local markets and to maximize the way they sell to global markets. And if you think about it, that would be the definition of the most powerful economy you can have. And if there's one mistake that I think economic developers have inadvertently made over the last generation, it's the assumption that if you just focus on the global piece, the local piece will take care of itself. When in fact, I think the preponderance of evidence, and I'll share some of this shortly, suggests that the causality works in the other direction, that if you focus on the local piece, you will generate hundreds, if not thousands, of vital local businesses, some of which will naturally project themselves in international affairs. The last piece of the living economy movement is that we're not just concerned with any business, we're interested in local businesses that are steadily improving their labor and environmental standards as well. There are people sitting in this audience, people who are watching this video, who I am confident are nervous about, if not detesting of, companies that begin with names like Wall and Home and Best and Pet. That is not what this movement is all about. There are many people who share this view. I share parts of that view, but I, frankly, am interested in supporting and nurturing the most competitive local economy possible. And I believe that if we focus on that, many of the other things that we worry about will sort of naturally either take care of themselves or wither away. What I'm going to talk about in the next few minutes are three major points. One is to give you some reasons about why we should be embracing LOIS rather than TINA. Then I want to talk about the competitiveness of LOIS, because I think we do not appreciate that local businesses are not just nice for the economy, but in fact, they are the key to the best economy you can have. And then finally, I want to talk about what a LOIS policy agenda looks like, with both some local and some state agenda items that might be of interest to the folks here. Let's first talk about why LOIS is a better bet for economic development than TINA. And let me pause for a second to just point something out. I have a lot of critical things to say about TINA, but it doesn't mean that TINA is bad or evil. It just means that it is inappropriate to focus public resources on TINA when in fact public resources are limited. The nature of public resources, whether it's time, energy, or money, is that they're scarce. And smart public policy focuses those resources laser-like on the things that are most effective. Over the last 5 years or so, I've gone around the country, and wherever I find advocates of TINA, I try to challenge them to public discussion, sometimes public debates. And one of the interesting debates that I had a while back was with the head of economic development for Lane County, Oregon. I was very fortunate that just before our debate, the local newspaper produced a study looking at 5 years of tax abatements that had been administered by my debate opponent, a fellow named Jack Roberts. And it turns out that millions of dollars had been given. 95% went to 6 non-local TINA companies. 3 came, took the benefits, and a year or 2 later shut down and moved to Asia. 2 came, took the benefits, and under-delivered the jobs they promised, and 1 was more or less on target. The other 5% of the tax abatements went to about 100 local businesses, all of which made modest job promises and pretty much kept the promises they made. The bottom line was really quite stunning, because in tax abatement terms, the cost of a LOIS job was $2,000 of public money. The cost of all the TINA jobs produced over the 5 years was $22,000 a job, so it was 10 times greater. But remember, some of those jobs came and went. So in net job terms, the cost of a TINA job was $67,000. It was 30 times more expensive to get a job from TINA than a job from LOIS. That's how inefficient it is to put public money into TINA. Now, was that just an accident or bad luck for Oregon? Maybe. But I want to give you 3 distinctive characteristics of LOIS that almost guarantee that they are going to be superior performers when it comes to revving up your economy. The first piece about Lois businesses, is surprise they don't move. Locally owned businesses stick around for many years, often for many generations. And the value of that is exemplified by the picture I have in the slide. That crazy dude there is a cheesehead. A cheesehead is a rabid fan of the Green Bay Packers. And the Green Bay Packers are important because they are the only team in the National Football League not owned by a single obnoxious individual. Many years ago, the Packers organized themselves into a community stock-held team. So while all of the other football teams are basically playing this game, build me a stadium and give me $25 million or I'm out of here, and that's what Art Modell did when he moved his Cleveland Browns to Baltimore, the Green Bay Packers are there for keeps, and they've produced hundreds of millions of dollars for Green Bay, and they will reliably produce this money for Green Bay in perpetuity. There will never be Baltimore Packers. Now, the flip side of that is that an economy that is rooted largely in locally owned businesses does not experience the catastrophe that can befall a poor community that has come to rely on one big TINA or several big TINA companies that shut down and move. I first got involved with the Training and Development Corporation in mid-Maine about 4 years ago when a paper mill that had operated for 100 years in a town called Millinocket shut down because the non-local owners wanted to move it to Canada. The last 1,400 people were thrown out of work, and the unemployment rate over the next year in mid-Maine was about 40%. That is higher than the height of the unemployment rate in this country during the Great Depression. It was as if a nuclear bomb went off in that economy. That kind of nuclear explosion does not, and frankly cannot, happen in an economy that is largely made up of local, anchored, independent businesses that are focused on local markets. So think of Lois as an insurance policy against that kind of catastrophe. The last point has to do with standards, labor and environmental standards. Now, this is hypothetical, but imagine if the city of Green Bay, Wisconsin passed a living wage ordinance. So suddenly, everyone in the town had to be paid $10 an hour or higher. Even the ticket sellers for the Green Bay Packers and the hot dog sellers. Now, I am sure that the Green Bay Packers would not be very happy with this ordinance. But would they move? No, they can't move because they're locally owned. They have to stay. They have to adapt. And if you are interested in raising gradually your standard of life, labor and environmental standards, at the end of the day, politics has to set the framework for business and not the other way around. And having an economy that is largely made up of local businesses allows you to achieve, I believe, an appropriate balance between the political and the business sectors. The second distinguishing feature of Lois, and this really goes to the heart of why they contribute to the well-being of the community, is that they have higher economic multipliers. Now let's define what an economic multiplier is. When you spend $1 at a local pharmacy, the pharmacist has employees. That dollar then gets respent by an employee at, say, a local food store. The local food store maybe has used that dollar to buy food from a local farmer. And so you have this dollar that's circulating in your economy. The more times that this dollar circulates, and the faster this dollar circulates without leakage, the more income, wealth, and jobs. That's really the most fundamental premise of economic development. It just so happens that local businesses do this far more powerfully than non-local businesses. This study